Hey guys, are you looking for a sportsbook that you can trust? Well, look no further than mybookie.ag, where you can get a 50% match on your initial deposit of up to $1,000 when you use promo code DFSArmy. As a bonus, when you use promo code DFSArmy, you also get a free month of DFS Army VIP and DFS Army Beat the Bookie membership. That's a $100 combined value. So we'll help you with your daily fantasy sports and we'll help you with your handicapping. Free when you sign up for mybookie.ag using promo code DFS Army.
In 2015, an elite DFS Army Commando unit formed to bring high-level DFS strategy to the masses. Today, hated by DFS sharks and lineup sellers alike, they continue their quest to turn Joe into DFS pros.
What's up, guys, and welcome to Taco's Fast 40 DFS NASCAR podcast. As always, we are brought to you by DFSArmy.com. If you want to check out all of the content we'll be covering on the podcast, along with access to all of our other daily fantasy sport content offerings, we're even doing arena football. And, as always, when DraftKings offers a new content or sport, they give you like no time to prepare for it, but the guys are doing a pretty awesome job with that so far. And of course, we are just crushing it on the NASCAR end. Anyone that listened to this podcast and played a couple weeks ago at Richmond, that contrarian GPP core that I was talking about, Logano and Bowyer and such, the alternate dominators, the ones that were really hammering down. Those guys end up really coming through for us, putting us well ahead of the rest of the field. And we had a member take down the huge $11 contest from last week. We had, myself, I took down the mini max not once, but twice, because I like winning GPPs twice now, apparently. And, we had guys winning the slingshot, the $1, $2, the lug nut. It was a pretty crazy week for us overall. Ended up being a really, really solid race. Feel like I nailed a lot of that race. Looking forward to, being able to do that more on the more fun short tracks of the circuit. But of course, this week will be a completely different monster. And just yesterday, absolutely crushed Xfinity. We had a 4-way tie for the big prize in the Octane, the $8 Octane. By far the biggest tournament on the entire slate that was available, and all 4 of the members that tied were all DFS Army members, all regulars actually, so huge shout out to those guys. Nobody else tied with them. I ran the same lineup, of course, twice, because I like running lineups multiple times now apparently, but twice in the $2, won that by 11 fantasy points. I think that's got to be the most I've ever won a tournament by. So last 2 races, I myself have won, and our members have won, and throughout the course of the season between trucks and Xfinities, we've had almost 10 guys win the Octane now at this point. I mean, that's our trucks and Xfinity content. It's just been on point all season, and we're going to continue to do that. The short turnaround kind of really gives us a nice edge to the rest of the field. Not many optimizers out there doing anything, so look to continue dominating. And of course, if you sign up today at DFSArmy.com using that link in the description, or just by typing in DFS Army on Google, we'll take you to our website, and you can join and get access to all the different sports and all of our awesome daily fantasy NASCAR coverage. And using promo code TACO really supports me and supports the podcast, and it'll get you a lifetime 20% off discount and get you in on what has to be the best daily fantasy NASCAR team that there is out there. So come join today. Would love to see you in the chat. So moving on to Talladega. Got to be really quick. This was a Saturday night qualifying. Getting this to you guys on Sunday morning, so I know you guys do not have a lot of time to listen to me ramble on for over an hour like I usually like to do. This is Taco's Fast 40. It's got to be a really fast 40 this week, which sucks because there's so much to talk about. Right off the bat, the huge story this week, you're going to hear the word uncertainty a lot from me and pretty much anyone else talking about this race because it is absolutely uncertain. This is the first time that we will not be using a restrictor plate at Talladega. And from now on, and Talladega and Daytona with the new rules package change, we will not be using restrictor plates anymore. The Daytona 500 was the last of that sort. I know it's not always had a restrictor plate in it, but all the data that we have that's, anytime recently over this last generation of car and such has all been with a restrictor plate, but now we are using the tapered spacer package to reduce the horsepower a bit, along with the gigantic spoiler, and they're also raising the splitter by an inch. And then on top of all this, after first practice, they saw that teams were going a bit too fast, had 21 cars go over 200 miles per hour. We're not like reaching, Bill Elliott's record or anything like that, but still the speeds were quite up there. NASCAR kind of scrambled and then forced the teams to add a 1-inch wicker strip to the top of their spoiler, which is like, it looks like a little wing. It kind of bends in. We've seen them before a while ago, but it's been a long time. And surprisingly enough, in second practice, guys actually went a little faster, pushed the speeds to 204. Now, before we get into going over what happened in practice and whatnot, it's just extremely important to remember that it's not going to race like it raced before, and it's almost sort of a fool's errand to guess how it will race. When we're going to be looking at practice and stuff, but we're mainly going to be looking at who's like working together and stuff. There are lots of rules that we've learned about restrictor plate races. We've gone over. If we have 4 a year and we started halfway through the 2016 season, it means we've seen around like 12 or so plate races on DraftKings, and with the added Xfinity races and stuff, people, if you play video games, of the concept of a meta, right? Or it's oftentimes known as the most effective tactic available. Well, at first, nobody understood the meta. I remember in 2016, we would just go in on these restrictor plate races because people were idiots. They didn't have a draft, a game log or anything. And even once they did add that, people would use that to influence their picks. And I still believe that some people do, in the GPPs where there's going to be hand building and stuff. But with the takeover of optimizers and stuff, a lot of people are getting more and more sharp, and we see it each restrictor plate race. And occasionally the field is kind of burned a little bit. If you remember the Daytona 500 from last year, where a lot of the guys starting in the front, which is usually a huge no-no at plate races, ended up putting up some really decent scores. And of course, this race from last fall, where the big one, the big expected crash that usually happens at Talladega, did not happen whatsoever. Much to my chagrin. I was there last year, watched that fall race. This is the first time since I think like 2011 they didn't have a big one, and it was an abomination of a race. We'll talk about that race in a little bit. It's not going to matter as much, of course. It's a new setup, but it's still, with a lot of what we're hearing, we might go back to that sort of style racing a lot with the manufacturer focus. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but so the field has got a lot smarter when it comes to what to do at a restrictor plate race. It's not, I remember at first Dale Earnhardt Jr. starting on the pole would get like over 20% ownership. Recently, we've seen these weird pole sitters come in under 12, even 10% ownership in higher dollar contests, especially in the really big contests. Almost nobody is taking these pole sitters. It's just never been smart. A lot of guys like to just fade the top 10, fade the top 15. I've always kind of recommended just using the Domination Station lineup optimizer dominator setting. Now you can set whoever you want to be your dominators. You can put in top 10, top 15, top 20, whatever. But you can select, at least there are no more than one of these dominators or guys starting from the top 15 or so. And, anytime there's carnage, anytime there's uncertainty and variance in a race, which restrictor plate races obviously lend themselves towards a lot more than way more than regular races. We tend to play place differential, and that's pretty much it. We just play the guys in the back. We have thousands of dollars on the table, and it's worked many a time. We've seen optimal lineups that use less than $40,000, leaving 5 digits of salary on the table, and that's not even weird. If you look at the top high scores here at Talladega of all time, no one's gotten over 100 fantasy points. We don't really see dominators like that. The top 5 scores all started 33rd or farther back in the pack. And of the top 20 scores, we've only seen 3 guys from the top 10. Really, you could go back to the top 20, the top 25 scores on DraftKings. We've seen just so many of them coming from the very back. If you look at the DraftKings average by starting position tab on the research station, if you just look at everybody, you can see that starting 1st through 5th, 6th through 10th, 11th through 15th, these all average 18 fantasy points. Then the 16th through 20th, 21st through 25th spots average in the mid-20s, and then 26th through 30th, 31st through 35th, 36th through 40th. These all average 34, 32, and 34 fantasy points on average. We see this is the one track alongside Daytona where we see higher scores from the guys in the back than we do the guys in the front. Usually it's the reverse of that because of lead laps, dominator points, and so on. But it's not the case. Everyone knows this, and the guys in the back usually get pretty darn chalky. A lot of it depends on qualifying. This week we actually had a lot of very expensive drivers like Kyle Busch and Kevin Harvick qualify back far enough where they're probably going to be popular, and using all of your salary is actually going to be fairly common. Something I would suggest to people usually is to, in the really weird ones where you want to leave thousands of dollars on the table, I would suggest using the slider for a max salary and, maybe forcing it to leave at least 500 off the table in every lineup. But you can make some really, really solid lineups and use about all the salary cap, which is something you do not see at restrictor plate races often. And then you've also got to think about, the very real possibility that this could be a bit more like a normal race and not as much of a big drafting plate race like we're used to. See, for anyone that doesn't know plate racing, honestly, it's probably an advantage for you that you don't have the preconceived biases of what to expect with plate races. You can just kind of take this information and move forward. And that's a lot of what this week is. This week will really, really, really show you how telling past data and current season data will be for these types of new Daytona and Talladega races. And really, it's just going to be interesting to see how it plays out, where the fast laps come from, whether it goes single file or stays in a big pack like at a restrictor plate, whether there'll be a lot of crashes or a lot of that green flag running that we've seen all season long. So it's going to be a really interesting race, very comparable to the Roval from last year in it being completely uncharted waters. And, here even more so, you want to take the guys in the back, although there are more laps to go around. Just the variant nature of, everything that's unexpected here really just comes into play. But there's one rule that I'm going to stick to here. I usually do this in, restrictor plate races, but especially with how things are turning out this week, I really want to use, guys who are on quality teams. I don't really want to focus too much on the guys in the very, very back. I mean, I will in GPPs, obviously, because a couple of them are going to survive, and they're going to be in the optimal. You've seen guys like David Ragan and Michael McDowell qualify in the top, or finish in the top 5. You've even seen Ragan win this thing back in 2013, but I don't think that's going to be as much of the case this week. I think that while, due to the huge track size, we're not going to see guys go laps down. And, another thing that comes with that is, things like pit penalties are not nearly as penal as they would be at like Bristol, where a pass-through penalty just completely ruins your day. All sorts of little things like that. But I'm going to be focusing more on the quality teams, because right now my main theory, and could be completely wrong, but I'm really guessing that a big difference that we'll see in DraftKings scoring from this week compared to previous Daytonas is possibly the distribution of the fast laps. Usually the fast laps go to whomever is at the very back of the largest pack. We've seen, here at Talladega, Kyle Busch averages just 4.6 fast laps per 188 laps. Kevin Harvick 4, Logano and Keselowski under 4, and you'd think, why is that? They lead. Logano and Keselowski have won 6 races here since 2014, leading all those laps and stuff. How are they not getting fast laps? And it's because the guys at the back of the draft are the ones getting the fast laps. Now, usually with the restrictor plate, almost everybody can run together, and we may see that in a decent portion of this race. I don't know if it's going to happen or not, but if we do see that, the guys in the very back are going to be collecting the fast laps. Guys we've seen continually rack up a ton of fast laps here. Guys like William Byron, guys like Alex Bowman, guys like David Ragan, like I had mentioned, even Corey LaJoie, or Jeffrey Earnhardt. Jeffrey Earnhardt averages over 4 fast laps per race, and he's never finished better than 28th here. We've seen like Reed Sorenson averages 3 fast laps per race, and it's because they go to whomever is just in the very back of the pack. And here, with how practice kind of shook out and what we're kind of really thinking for this race, I think the manufacturers, like I mentioned earlier, are really wanting to separate and focus only on themselves, and we saw it straight from practice. And I'll go through practice here in a little bit, but there's going to be just a huge focus on manufacturers and team play, for the drafting that could be a single file drafting, which is what I guess will probably happen, or it could be straight up wild pack racing, or it could just be like tandem drafting where only a few people are locked in together. We saw some really good runs in final practice from just 3-man squads, but the fast laps are going to go to the guys at the back of whatever draft is the fastest. And if we get things a little separated here, we could see, it's just my guess, that we see some more fast laps going to the more quality drivers here without that restrictor plate. But we can look here historically. No one has gotten more than 17 fast laps to themselves here since 2013, and we race here twice a year. The fast laps are usually just randomly dispersed everywhere with almost no rhyme or reason. I still think it's going to be a bit of the case anytime drafting is involved, but I do think it's going to funnel a little more to the guys in the back of these drafts. We saw that in practice, and I might as well go over practice here. Went through practice pretty carefully. You can see the lap by lap times on the research station, and you really kind of want to just separate it by manufacturers, 'cause that's pretty much who stuck together here. I went through the first couple of practice here. I'm just going to tell you the guys that were drafting together. So in practice 1, we started off with a huge train of Chevys, and the vice president of performance vehicles for Chevy and motorsports, he said that the benefit of working together is too great versus the penalty of not working together. We have to work together as a team, but also be adaptive. That's what we're trying to balance. And Austin Dillon said about the matter that looking at what other teams have been successful at last couple of plate races, you look at the guys and they're grouping up, and they're dictating the race, and we don't want to be in that position where we're having to fight from behind the whole time. We have good numbers at Chevy. We need to just use them and honestly just look at what the competition has done and do our job to be better at that. And I think that's it's alluding to a concept that's sort of relatively new. We saw it, shining big time in the 2016 Daytona 500, where JGR had all their cars running together. They purposefully went to the back and just ran together in their own separate draft, and then of course ended up having the crazy Hamlin and Truex finish there, the neck and neck finish at the end. But this week, practice shows us that it's no surprise the manufacturer is going to be very separated, and it all alludes to last fall's race, where that was exactly the case the entire race. Stewart-Haas Racing, I just watched it with my own eyes. Stewart-Haas Racing just sat there in first place the entire time. So I went to last year's race with my dad. I wasn't really paying hardcore attention to the race. My dad lives pretty far away in Alabama. Got to talk with him for the first time in a little while, and it was really nice having just some good father-son bonding time when we were there. But we were watching the race. He was rooting for Logano. He has his favorite number there. He pretty much always roots for whoever the 22 guy is. Ended up with a darn good pick there, as Logano almost won and ended up winning the championship, of course. But we watched it the whole time. It was nothing like any of the Talladega races I had seen before. Yeah, sometimes they get pretty single file. Usually like stage 2. Ever since we've been doing the stages, stage 2 usually is the one where people don't crash and it's pretty boring. You can kind of skip it, but we have seen it get kind of drug out. But we used to see more, phantom debris cautions and stuff to get the field back together at the end to really get the crowd into it. And the big one is almost like guaranteed. They market the crap out of the big one when advertising for Talladega. That's what people remember about it, is the large, huge, amazing crashes. We saw them in the Xfinity series, but here in this new package with the Cup series, last year we saw just absolutely no crashes whatsoever. It was unlike Talladega. Clean race. I think Jimmie Johnson spun, and then at the end, I can't remember. There were a couple of guys that spun at the end, but it wasn't like a big crash by any means. No big one that's could take out I think we've seen up to like 25 cars go down in one crash. It just never happened. And it made for a really, really boring race because they just sat there single file. It was pretty much Stewart-Haas Racing in front of Penske, in front of everyone else, and it was like that for a huge portion of the race. I think JGR had a section where they were leading for a little bit, but it was really just non-eventful, boring, and just all the specific teams just stuck together. We saw a little bit of teamwork between like Penske and Stewart-Haas Fords, but for the most part, the teams were the ones doing all the teamwork. And before, we'd see the Chevys and the Toyotas kind of work together, because if you remember last year, the Fords were pretty much just crushing everything, and they had no success with it. But Denny Hamlin actually was saying something about how the Chevys are focusing on getting, focusing only on themselves and not really working with the Toyotas this year. He said, I think some of the other Chevys probably griped about the Hendrick guys working with us, which, they had from time to time. They aren't, enemies or anything. But, when talking about Chevy's plan that they put out to just really work together and stick together as a team, he said, I knew it was coming. And he's friends with several of the Hendrick, or the Chevy drivers, really. But he knows that, over the last month or so, they've been meeting together and trying to focus more on just working as a team. So we're going to see that from then. Going back to, going through the practices real quick. Practice 1, we saw Kurt Busch the first big group we saw was Kurt Busch, Austin Dillon, Ty Dillon, right behind him, Bowman, Byron, Johnson. So, all of the Hendricks guys minus Chase, and then the ending of that line, they had McDowell and Ragan together. Two of the three front row motorsport guys that are going to be really interesting this week. Front row and Roush are, they're going to factor in a lot more this week than in weeks prior. We'll talk about that a little more as we go on. But McDowell, Ragan, then Chase was at the very end of that line coming out. But over time they were all just switching in and out of positions. Again, you cannot focus on practice times at all. Don't look at the practice times, the lap averages, because they were not putting in real laps at all. They were shuffling in and out of position. Maybe every now and again they do a few laps where they all draft together as a team, and they all have the exact same times. You can see it on the lap by lap practice data. You can tell who was drafting together. But I went in, made sure to look at exactly who was drafting together, and that was the big Chevy group. After that, we saw Larson, who had been doing some solo runs, eventually get together with that Chevy group and join them. And then for a little while, we saw Austin Dillon, Bubba Wallace, and Kevin Harvick drafting together, which was interesting. And then we saw finally the Fords come out. That group was Logano, Harvick, Suárez, Almirola, Bowyer, Keselowski, Blaney, then Menard, Stenhouse, and Newman. So all the big Ford racers there. We did not see much of the Toyotas at all, especially Hamlin. Spent a lot of time in the garage at first practice. They came out in the second practice, and then just going through the second practice here real quick. This time the group from Chevy that came out as a group and stuck together for quite a while was Kurt Busch in front of this one as well, and then Chase Elliott, Jimmie Johnson, Austin Dillon, no Ty Dillon this time, just Austin Dillon, who's our pole sitter, Kyle Larson, William Byron, Bowman, and then Daniel Hemrick. Interesting to see him included there as well, the other RCR teammate of Austin Dillon. And usually the RCR guys kind of like to hang out with Ty Dillon and Bubba Wallace too, the charter guys, but they were not in this big group. This was the kind of the for reals practice here, and they're running fairly fast. But I'll tell you about the fastest group here coming up. After this, we saw the Toyotas come out. They weren't the fastest, and they didn't even run a whole lot of laps really. But that the row they came out in was Kyle Busch, Martin Truex Jr., then Erik Jones, so the three JGR guys, then Matt DiBenedetto after that, who's, pretty much a charter to JGR, and then Ricky Stenhouse Jr., Ryan Newman, and Matt Tifft behind them. And they ended up creating pretty much a threesome, them together, after breaking off from that group, and they ran the outside, and they actually had the fastest times in final practice. Newman was at the end of that group, but Matt Tifft was just consistently putting up great laps. He pretty much only ran that run with Stenhouse and Newman, the two Roush drivers, and he was just doing, he was right there with them, and they all put together pretty much the fastest laps on the board, kind of focusing on the outside lane. The inside lane, it's a little bit faster usually, always, because it's just a shorter way around the track. I think that's why guys in the outside lane start farther up in the Olympics and stuff. But here sometimes we do see the outside lane getting to be a little faster. The inside lane is safer, but we heard from some guys that if they focus and make the outside work, and they have help, which is the big thing. When you break from the pack, when you're drafting at a big track, super speedway like this, you have to have guys come out with you, or else you get hung out to dry and drop like 10, 20 laps at a time. That's part of what creates the the constantly shuffling positions here, and the random finishes alongside of the wrecks. But anyway, when you go to create a new lane, you can find speed as long as you get guys to go out with you. So another reason I like taking these guys on bigger teams and these guys that were able to kind of draft with the bigger guys. If there's somebody that, people feel safe about drafting with, guys like, people that aren't Stenhouse. Honestly, Stenhouse is a very, very good plate racer, so that joke doesn't really work as well here, but you know what I mean. You don't want to be the guy that has no friends out there. They fall very quickly, so you can make that outside work as long as you, as a team, use a coordinated method to go up there and then get a lot of help, but it's going to be risky. It's going to benefit more aggressive drivers and risk takers, but again, along with risk comes the risk of you getting shuffled back like 20 positions in one lap. It happens here. It might not happen here as much with the new package. I don't know. We're going to see, and it's going to be interesting. We're reaching the 30-minute mark of this podcast, and I haven't talked about a driver yet. Still want to talk about so many strategy things for you guys, but I know that I do not want to just ramble on when we've got some lineups to make. Let's get down into this field, and we're going to go backwards. Yes, that's right. We're going to start from the tail end of this field and work our way forwards. So we're going to quickly go over these guys in the very, very back, ones that we would usually be just piling on. And, before I go through the drivers real quick, I do just want to give an overall statement of what I think the best strategy is going to be here at this track. So all things considered, I'd already mentioned that I want the drivers on better teams. Now the guys starting 32nd and back, they're all small teams. You really had the bad drivers kind of finish, or qualifying at least. They qualified, down sort of where they belong. The two slowest are the two Rick Ware racing cars, 51, 52, which we know are pretty crappy cars in general, along with the Spire 77 that Haley is debuting in. When rookies debut, I guess you want them to kind of debut at a plate race because they can have, well, not a plate race, but, this sort of high variance, sort of race here. It's not a bad spot to have them at because if they can just chill back and survive and drive really passively like they will, and just try not make mistakes that might, help them out a little bit. But, with guys like Hill, you still have the inevitable like pit penalties and stuff, but hey, that's not very penal here. So again, why not just have a rookie here? But yeah, looking at the guys in the back of the field, it's going to be really hard to go in on any of them. They all have their concerns. We don't get any freebies like Eric Almirola from the Daytona 500 starting in the back and stuff. Gonna have to really kind of pick and choose between these scrubs sort of by merit. The reason I'm going backwards through this field is because the guys in the back just matter a lot more by default. The guys in the front are going to mostly just be fading and hoping that the field plays them. It's sort of the usual strategy here, but I will be talking about some contrarian angles to go at along the way. But generally the strategy is, since the outcome of the race is really not all that known, it's going to be very difficult to pinpoint that down. And with ownership looking to be, I wouldn't say predictable, but you kind of know who people are going to go at. I really think this is a race where, with all the expected carnage, you'll want to take contrarian place differential plays, but also not get too drawn in by the awful drivers. That's kind of the strategy, and I'll talk about it as we go down the field. One thing I did want to mention was just some drivers' thoughts on the racing, and a lot of them seem to, there were conflicting results at first, but after practice, there are a few key things that the drivers are really stressing here, and a lot of it has to do with the change of the wicker, which I might add made a lot of the guys on the coverage sound like they were about to go wicker Slim Shady, but they would just randomly drop that constantly in the reporting in sentences saying the wicker. But anyway, again, gotta hurry here. The addition of the wicker kind of made the closing speeds really, really fast. David Ragan said, "I've never felt closing speeds like this at any track ever." You can look at Denny Hamlin, what he says about it. He thinks there's going to be a lot of lead changes, hard to hold the lead tomorrow, which is great and all. The package will create some really big runs, and we'll hear a lot of guys say this. That means is pretty much guys will get some momentum, working in a draft together, and, it will send guys past the leader. And he said they better have that momentum, because pulling out of line with the air ducts is like a parachute on the car. You'll see I did add on the research station in the speed rank splits. I did one for the tapered spacer plus aero ducts edition tracks, which was the faster tracks, actually ones that kind of correlate better than other tracks to this one. Auto Club, Texas, and Las Vegas. Those were the 3 races so far we've seen the not only the tapered spacer but also the aero ducts added. You can kind of look at that split a little bit. Again, it's hard. I really don't like looking at historical splits, not putting restrictor plate splits up there because it's just kind of dumb. Mostly just looking at 2019 stuff. But if I were to really focus in on anything, it would probably be the spacer and ducts split there, but still mostly going to just be focused on being contrarian and finding guys that have really solid upside at potentially lower ownership, or just eating the chalk and playing it safe. I'm also really not a big opponent of that strategy at all. With all the uncertainty on the race, you're really just playing it safe with place differential. Probably ain't gonna kill you. You're probably gonna return a pretty decent amount of money. To win it all, I mean, who knows? You still gotta get the scenarios right, But my focus is going to be mixing it up and then potentially running the domination station a few different times, just under different scenarios. One for if it races a little bit more like a normal race, and maybe one for complete and utter chaos and carnage, and maybe another for just sort of like a restrictor plate race where we've been seeing, where it's a little more green flag than usual, and there is no big crashes, and guys from the front kind of end up doing okay, but still not going to focus on dominators and all that. Top 10 guys are really not going to be too much in play for me unless they have a real ownership upside, but we'll get into that. Again, strategy, a little bit up in the air. Pretty much do whatever you want. Just have fun with it. This is going to be I keep saying the word interesting, but it really is going to be an interesting race. We're going to learn a whole lot from it. So let's get into this field here. Cody Ware starting dead last in the 51 Rick Ware Racing car, right next to his teammate Stanton Barrett. His practice times, the 10 laps he put in, were abysmal, over 5 seconds off the pace. I think he's going to be a bit of a trap play. We kind of saw Chad Fincham yesterday in the Xfinity race, sort of the same deal. But at least he was able to go out and practice a little bit. Now, Bowyer actually finished like 21st in the Xfinity race and did pretty well there, but he didn't have the worst equipment in the field like he does here. He's one of the 200-to-1 guys, and usually we see these odds for these guys at the very bottom at like 2,000, so that'll tell you something right there. Seeing these guys at 200, there's just so much more expected variance here. The winner could be whoever, really. You hear him constantly talk on the coverage about underdogs, because yes, this is where an underdog can win, but you can quit saying it for the 1,000th time. But anyway, Cody Ware, not really feeling him. He's starting last though. He could just putter back and just survive a big one and be okay, but I'm not too huge on it. His teammate Barrett, he has a completely empty game log, which always lowers ownership when there's absolutely nothing to know about him. Justin Haley's in the same boat there, but people kind of know Haley from Xfinity, especially with his great performance at Daytona. They don't know anything about Stanton Barrett. And he's like the cheapest player on the board. Starting 39th, I'm probably going to play a good amount of Stanton Barrett, to be quite honest. His car was, he actually practiced in practice one, unlike his teammate Ware. And it was decent, like 30th on the board. Again, not focusing too much on these practice times, but I am going to use them for the guys at the tail end here just to get a general sense of if their car could even hang. He had a faster car than Haley and Reed Sorensen ahead of him, and pretty similar speeds to Parker Kligerman, who seems to be a pretty decent play that people will go to a bit this week with his with his relatively good finishes here and a good finish at Daytona. So it's really nice seeing that out of Mr. Barrett there. And he did practice both practice sessions. This is kind of my contrarian place differential play I'm going to go with here. With people wanting to spend up a lot of the salary, there's not going to be people punting down to Barrett, like we see in Xfinity all the time. He's going to go very overlooked, and I think I'm going to go in on him a bit just because of that. And we've also got, but again, he's also, he's making his debut here. So with him and Haley, guys like that, the risks involved. I'll probably run him like 10, 15% or something just to be above the field. And, it's hard to go too much on any of these guys. When I optimize something like this where I know very little about how it's going to end up going, I really like to spread it out a good amount. That way I'm on, the guys in the end who end up being really key. But I'm also not too heavily invested in any one person. I mean, you can do that, definitely. It's all up to you. But that's just kind of how I like to play it, especially when it's so just kind of random. But anyway, Haley, price doesn't matter. You'll kind of notice me. I didn't go by salary this week on purpose because price really doesn't matter too much unless you're going to jam in like Kyle Busch and Harvick together or something. But yeah, Justin Haley, he's making that debut. I talked about him a little bit earlier. The speeds are okay. First practice, he was like the same speed as Barrett, but he kind of really tailed off practice too. I was 38th in average speed, 37th in fast laps, about 3.5 seconds off the pace. So another guy that I'm going to be in on because he's starting 38th and has the potential to move up, but it's only through survival. These would be like carnage guys that you use. You could say the same for Reed Sorensen, who I think might be the lowest owned guy on the board. If not Daniel Hemrick starting 5th, just because he really is, his practice times are terrible, barely practiced, or didn't practice first practice, has awful stats this season in the races he has raced, and in his last 3 here he's finished 37th, 40th, and 37th. But usually when Sorensen races, he doesn't park it. He's racing the 27 for Tommy Baldwin. Not the 27 that Menard drove for RCR though. Don't get that confused there. I use them a little bit, but these are just like sprinkles. These are the guys you're using in like the Mini Max and $1 and stuff like that, just to be really different. But I wouldn't make any of these guys like serious plays. Maybe Barrett, just because I think the ownership is going to be nice and he could, I don't know, do something maybe. Another guy I do like here, Corey LaJoie, is starting in 36th. For a normal week, that would honestly be a great spot for LaJoie to start. He runs around the 30th position. That's pretty much his spot. And he's driving the 32 that DiBenedetto used to drive last year. Of course, you can look at his history here. It's okay. It has 3 top 20s and some DNFs, pretty typical performances for Daytona given the equipment level. Always put up about a 51 driver rating. Not all that great, but LaJoie, in that 32, in a Ford, a lot of these guys in the back are Chevys. So keep in mind that LaJoie is driving a Ford, and then Kligerman and Earnhardt are driving Toyotas. Again, if we're thinking manufacturers, again, I know these guys will not be drafting with their with the higher ups at all or anything, but just something to point out. The rest are like all Chevys. So yeah, Kligerman. No, we're not to Kligerman yet, but LaJoie is 150 to 1. So is Haley. So just look a little bit better than these other guys. Didn't practice in second practice, which is a little kind of discouraging for me here. But I think he's someone that can definitely move up spots, and he could even like crack into the top 20. I don't think it would be that weird if there's like some big carnage or something. Now Parker Kligerman, starting 35th, everyone's favorite in-track analyst, or was it like usually is out just with like the RV parks and stuff, just seeing what's going on, hanging out trackside or in the infield. But he's racing today. He's raced a few times this year and runs around the 29th position. He was really slow in the first practice, one of the slowest cars out there, and even in the second practice got up to like 34th on the board. It doesn't really matter too much here. He's finished within 5 laps of the lead lap in every single race this year, for what it's worth. No one I've talked about yet, and no one I will talk about until we reach Erik Jones starting in the 20th or so position. But of all these guys, like in the 5K, 4K range, he's the only one that's finished within 5, even within 10 laps of the lead in every single race that he's raced in. But he's only raced 4 races this year. Usually outperforms his equipment a little bit. I don't mind using some Kligerman here, but I think of all of these guys in the back, he will be the most popular. Maybe the next guy I'm about to talk about, Chastain. So Chastain, he's driven every race in every series this year. The announcers, always talk about how he's driving his heart out. He got robbed of the 42 ride in Xfinity with their FBI bust with the sponsor and all that, but still holding strong and usually outperforming the equipment that he's using. Looked amazing, just absolutely amazing in the in yesterday's race. But also at the same time, you got to remember he kind of switched cars too and was using the car he was using in Daytona. But still, very, very good performance from Chastain. Usually does pretty well, and finished top 25 in both of his races last year. That was his debut here, so. Put up some really good finishes, and just has a knack for finishing above where he runs all race. Usually finishes 4 spots higher than his average running position. Kind of has a nose for that, sort of like a guy like Landon Cassill. So Chastain probably also going to be pretty popular alongside Kligerman, LaJoie here. Don't really mind it though. He costs more than the others, so I think people might also be inclined to use him over Kligerman and LaJoie for that reason. But he was like ultra slow in first practice, almost 5 seconds off the pace in his 7 laps that he ran, just with his fast lap time. Just it could have just been like experimenting and stuff. Again, not going to read too much into that, but seemed to kind of get it together in second practice, and not much more to go off of there. And he was 28th on the board in that final practice. I mean, it's perfectly fine. 1.6 seconds off the pace. That's comparable to guys like Chris Buescher. Just looking at the, again, limited sort of laps you got going here. But, again, not a guy you're going to go too crazy on. I would not use any of these 4K guys over like 20%. I think that's a little ridiculous, but he'd be somewhere I'd look to in this range here in the very back in these Carnage lineups. You've got Jeffrey Earnhardt, who was taking a serious reduction in ride quality, going from the 18 in Xfinity to the 81 in Cup for XCI Racing. He's usually raced here in the 00 that Cassill drives, and he's put up just awful performances pretty much every time. 2017 spring race, he did finish 28th just out of raw attrition. But generally, he's always sucked here. And with his current equipment right now, he's, sort of in the I don't know zone. He has an Earnhardt last name, and it's Talladega, so I assume he'll get some ownership, but I can't imagine, the DFS regulars will use him an awful lot starting 33rd when you could get guys at a very similar skill starting in the very, very back. So, it won't be too popular over 10% or anything, but again, it's hard to be too optimistic about Earnhardt here. I'd rather just leave him alone. Then we get to Landon Cassill. Only $4,800 for Landon Cassill this week, which is, it would be cheap if salary mattered all too much. But hey, if I need to super punt, if I'm playing like Kyle Busch and Harvick together, I'll go to Cassill. He's kind of my pick of all these $4,000-$5,000 guys. Starting at 32nd, which is the highest of all of them. Until you get to like, I guess Gaughan and Ragan and McDowell did qualify a bit ahead of him, but this 32nd and back sort of region of the pack is where I kind of consider this its own little tier, and Cassill would be the best pick out of them. He's finished top 30 here at Talladega in his last 6 races, last 5 races, and finished 11th in the 2016 spring race, 4th in the 2014 fall race, 11th in the 2014 spring race. He knows how to get it done here. This is a place where driver skill can overpower equipment. Again, it might not be as much of the case this week, but still, if there's anyone who knows how to avoid crashes, avoid attrition, and just safely scoot up spots, that is Landon Cassill. That is what he does. Of course, I obviously hate his car that he's in. He drove this last year to a 22nd place finish, though. This is going to be a much, much, much better week to use Cassill starting 32nd, which is like where he starts every week, than a normal week, because he has a lot more upside and potential here. And I don't see his ownership getting too out of control, which I think is a bit of a mistake. Maybe people will see his form at the track or something, but I think he kind of fits the mold for what I'm looking for in Carnage lineups. Now into the chalk zone, the value zone, 31st through, 20th, 19th. This whole range here is just chock full of value that everybody's going to be used. Going to be lots of chalk. It's very, very chalked full of value. We're starting off with Chris Buescher, starting 31st. He's pretty much hit as the chalk every time this year. People are going to like using him. He's finished 22nd or better here in 5 straight races. Runs around 19th or 20th position so far this year. I love the man Buescher. I really do. I love him a lot. I'll probably end up being overweight to the field because it's just too good of a spot to pass up, and he's generally a pretty safe driver. He's finished within 2 laps of the lead in 88% of his races this year, and the ones that he didn't were like DNF. So he's usually up there, finishing on the lead lap about half the time, and that's pretty impressive considering that we've been on some short tracks. And he has looked seriously improved this year, sort of like I expected. Expect him to really put himself out there more and more. And he's starting next to his teammate Ryan Preece, starting at 30th. He's going to be way more popular than Preece. I almost would just play Preece more than Buescher here, but I really just like Chris Buescher in general, and will probably end up being a sucker and going with the chalk there. But believe me, he will get quite chalky. He's at $6,900 on DraftKings, which is nice. Over on FanDuel, actually, we can... he kind of got priced up a bit over there, but I'd still love using him over there. I think he's great for their scoring setup that they have. He's only $6,200 over there. That's a steal. Would not mind using him there. Then you've got Ryan Preece again. It's been... he looked amazing at Daytona, and a lot of it was just because he was able to just squeeze through wrecks. He couldn't the week after that, of course, but he looked amazing with his... where did he end up finishing? I think it was a top 10 finish from him. Yeah, it was... he finished 8th at Daytona. Couldn't have looked much more impressive, but he pretty much finished 8th through raw attrition and just being able to work his way through the wrecks quite masterfully. It was a very good debut from him. He's starting 30th. I do like using him, and I like using him over Buescher. Maybe the top 10 at Daytona will push his ownership up a good amount, but I don't see it being more than Buescher. I don't see his upside being more than Buescher either, but it's not that bad. I could see him coming top 20, even top 15, or in Carnage situations, who knows? Maybe even a top 10 if enough people crash. But Preece, on a pretty good team with a direct charter to Hendrick, do not mind him at all. He wasn't really drafting with the guys too much, but we did see him around a little bit. I think in practice too, he did get together with some guys. They were doing some big, just overall pack racing and stuff, and a lot of people got together towards the end of that one. But Ryan Preece, don't mind using him as a bit of a contrarian place differential play, starting in 30th. Then you've got Brendan Gaughan, starting 29th. He's sort of a known entity at plate races. Very good at Daytona and very good at Talladega. Finished 12th here in last year's fall race. And that wasn't even through attrition. I mean, barely anyone crashed there. He just is very good at plate racing. That's his thing. He ended up having to have Tyler Reddick qualify for him. What happened was it was just a family matter. I guess his son was going through a communion. Had Reddick step in. He will be going to the back of the field. This is something that we know. It doesn't matter too much here, and frankly, I'll use him a little bit. If it weren't for, his speeds not being the greatest in, first practice is really, really slow, almost 4 seconds off the pace, but got to within 0.8 seconds off the pace in final practice. He seems like a really good play, especially if people are going to be off of him knowing he's going to the back. That's been out pretty early. It doesn't project pretty well, but could be a nice little pocket play if you intend on doing that. Just a very good, skillful plate racer. Next, we've got Bubba Wallace, starting 28th. Top 20 here at Talladega in both attempts. It has not looked very good this season. His team has had some money issues, but still, this is a spot where his skill can kind of come through a little bit. And he's another guy I do not mind using at all. Not sure how popular he'll get. I don't see him getting too popular. His game log is not attractive, really, and just hasn't been popping too much. Maybe the track history helps, but I don't know. Still rates out as a really good play for me, and I don't see him being owned to the point where he becomes a bad play. I think he's actually a good leverage play to go over on. Then you've got a guy that will be popular, but how popular will he be? I don't know. Erik Jones, starting in 27th. Priced up at $8,700. That might keep his ownership down a little bit, because he did, that is a really big price compared to his usual low 8,000s, high 7,000s price. But people also see that he was second and sixth in the two practices with second overall in 10-lap averages in the final practice. So he practiced well. The first 3 times he tried to race here, he DNF'd, but finished the race last year and finished 8th with the JGR guys. And was coming in a little bit behind like Hamlin in that. But still, Erik Jones got his Daytona win last year. So he can obviously win at these super speedways, of course. This package has been kind of weird. He actually raced a little bit better at the Spacer and Duck tracks than he did just overall on this season. Starting 27th, with his history of crashing here, I think that will keep his ownership down from him being super crazy chalk. With such a great starting position. And also just people know that he spins and wrecks a lot more than your average driver. He probably spins or wrecks more than any driver. He saves it a lot. He does a lot of spins where he saves his car, but he is very aggressive, GPP only sort of play. I wouldn't even play him in cash games, even though he's starting 27th, because he is quite aggressive of a driver, but he's an awesome GPP play, and I'm going to try to be over on him. Next, you've got Matt DiBenedetto, starting 26th. He's in that Levi and Family Racing 95 Toyota. That's kind of directly chartered to JGR, and it seems like JGR's entire strategy, really Toyota's strategy this week, it's similar to what they've done at other plate races over the last few years, and that's start off by going to the back and chilling. They all qualified 20th or worse, and I have I suspect that they're going to back off with all the uncertainties and the chance of a wreck coming. That I think they're going to back off initially and just let the race, be as it may for a little bit, and then try to get back into it once they figured it out. And DiBenedetto, I would throw into these stacks. The thing is, though, I think a Toyota JGR stack with a guy like DiBenedetto for salary relief, I think that's going to be a super, super chalky lineup construction. Everyone's going to want to do that because pretty much most of the good plays this week that cost a lot of salary are the JGR Toyotas starting, 20th or worse. So I would still definitely get him in some Toyota stacks. It'd be kind of dumb to not have a Toyota stack with how kind of free they are with the place differential here. But yeah, I kind of want to make a targeted fade at DiBenedetto. Everyone saw that he led the most laps at Daytona. I think his ownership is going to be a little higher than it really should be. That's just how I feel about the matter right now. We've got, after him, William Byron starting 25th. I really love this play. Really, really love this play. And with him starting 25th, it's not exactly sexy enough of a spot to where people throw him in automatically. He's priced right next to DiBenedetto there, and I think people will be more akin to just playing him. Or even go up to Jones or something, or Jimmie Johnson's really cheap, Menard in this area. He'll still get his fair amount of ownership because he was fast in both practice sessions. He was 6th and then 12th, 6th and 10 lap speeds, so people will see that. Finished 20th here in the fall race last year and 29th in that spring race. But he has raced really well at Daytona also. We saw a lot of the Chevy guys do a little bit better at Daytona, and he's raced considerably better at the Spacer and Duck tracks. His 10-lap average, on average, his rank there is 9.5. So that's like top 10, on average in 10-lap average speed, and usually that's at about a 15.4 when you look at all the races together. And it just seems like he can show up a little bit better here. We saw a lot of the Hendrick Chevys were the fastest cars just overall at Daytona. We saw Elliott; he had pretty much the fastest car throughout the whole race, and that kind of spreads to his teammates. Chevy is going to be ultra strict about racing together, and I feel like Byron could be on the tail end of some of those Chevy stacks and just rack up some fast laps. So I'm all about Byron here. I think he's a great little. I don't know if he'll be a pivot play. He'll still be popular, but he could be a really good person to go in this range. I know I just passed the hour mark. Gonna run through the rest of this field, I promise, but this all kind of needs to be said. So pro tip, if you can understand it and I haven't been talking too fast, 1.25 or 1.5x speed, maybe put that in. So again, gonna run through the rest of this field. Got through all the most of the juicy place differential plays. We're about to get into the real thick of it here. You got Ryan Newman at $7,800. Ultra expensive price for him, but he was fastest in final practice. How was he? Remember, he was part of that threesome that they had there of Stenhouse, Newman, and Matt Tifft run the outside together, and they were just able to put in some lightning laps. So, I don't know, maybe stack those guys together. That might be a decent strategy. Newman starting 24th. He does tend to get some ownership, and his track history here is pretty solid. He has 5 top 10s since 2013, including a second place finish in the 2017 fall race. And in this race last year, he finished 9th. 7th in the first practice as well. So people are going to see that he, quote unquote, has speed. Really, he just was lucky enough to be at the very end of that draft instead of in the middle or in front. That was pretty much the only difference in those lap times there. But yeah, Ryan Newman, I'm probably going to try to fade him. Still determining whether or not he's going to be very popular because that price up is huge. I've seen that people kind of shy away from making guys the chalk when their price is the highest it's ever been. And when, on the contrary, when guys are at the lowest price they've ever been, sometimes they like to over-own those guys just because they're like, oh, wow, I've never seen him at this price. I'll use him now. But, again, that happens a little bit more in the hand build, 20 max, 3 max sort of contest. And the big optimizer ones, I still think he'll be used fairly heavily. Again, it's all about contest selection sometimes. But Newman, really solid play, starting 24th. Should go up. Problem is he likes to block here, and let me read some notes on what guys said about blocking. Kevin Harvick, the runs are so huge, if someone tries to throw a big block tomorrow, they're gonna get wrecked. You've got Kyle Busch, who may have put it the best. I'll say Clint Bowyer's first. Kyle's a good one to save for last year, but Clint Bowyer said the racing is going to be drastically different than before. Getting a run behind a car is a holy crap sensation I've never felt before. air feels perfectly clean or crisp if you're right behind another car and you suck right up to it. And Matt DiBenedetto also said the runs come so quickly in this package, the leader won't be able to do that block and defend thing like Reddick did in the Xfinity race win. My spotter can barely spit out what's happening before it takes place. Happens much quicker than before. So again, we could see more crashes that would lend itself to the carnage strategy. We can only really hope when it comes to that. But Newman loves to block. Might get him in some trouble here. I don't know. Just a little bit of a narrative there. But, that with the first overall final practice speed might be enough for me to fade him, because I think his ownership might be a little bit more than he's actually worth. And he's so good at finishing races. That's why it's so hard to bet against him. But on average, he runs about 20th at these spacer and duck tracks. So I'll probably just stick to it and fade him. You guys should hold me to that. I'm a fade Newman. I picked too many guys to pick so far. I need to pick some guys to fade, so I'll say Newman here. Then you've got Denny Hamlin, who I expect to be the chalk, either him or Kyle Busch, probably the highest owned here. He's starting back in 23rd, and he's been racing very well recently, the recent win and all. I was in the garage most of first practice, snuck out in practice 2, put in just a really solid little run with the big group as they were all running together, but he wasn't part of that core Toyota to start off practice 2. They had Stenhouse and Newman and Tifft and DiBenedetto with them. It was really just Kyle Busch, Truex, and Jones that put that long run together, drafting side by side. But Hamlin, he's just so good at finishing, in general, so good at putting down top 10s. It's hard to bet against him, hard to hope on him, crashing. He's his most recent finish this year, 4th, 14th, 6th, 11th, 3rd, winner in 2014. Won the Daytona 500 a few years ago, obviously. Just going to be just a hard guy to bet against because he's so safe, so incredibly safe. He's finished every lap this year. Probably not someone I'm going to bet against starting 23rd. I know he's going to be ultra popular, him and Kyle Busch. I'm just going to have to live with that. Probably try to match the field, really, instead of going over. But it's hard not to play Hamlin starting 23rd. And then you've got Kyle Busch, $12,000, which at this point might be a steal for him with how consistently he finds the front of the field and gets a ton of fast laps. It's like every single race he finds his way out front somehow. The odds-on favorite to win here. And he's starting in 22nd position. Should definitely be the chalk. And I think him being the chalk might knock Kevin Harvick down a bit, which we'll talk about that later. But he's had the fastest green flag speed, the fastest 10-lap average, and the third fastest 30-lap average at every single one of these spacer and duct tracks that they've raced. So Kyle Busch obviously looking ultra fast with the package. This year he's just a step above everyone else. Looked perfectly fine in practice in the laps he did take. Has just a ridiculous 121 driver rating, which is so much higher than everyone else. It's 20 points higher than anyone else here on the 2019 season. He's finished every lap. I mean, the dude is pretty much a cash money play. He's a very bold fade if you want to get rid of the chalkiest person on the board, which I expect him to be. Him or Hamlin, they're going to be some really ballsy fades. And even fading Toyota altogether and hoping something happens to him, it's going to be ballsy. Of course, you'll do that in your Chevy and Ford stack, so you'll kind of get that passively. But making a huge stand like that could be it's a really bold GPP move, I'll say that. Just so hard to bet against Kyle Busch here. You would need something to go wrong for him not to move up some, but at the same time, it's a little harder to pay off his huge price tag if it does come to that. At this track where the scores are generally a bit lower. On things like on FanDuel, with how things work out there, you might just have to pay for him because he's like almost a free pick over there. Even at $14,000, he's just so easy to afford. again, it'll also be incredibly chalky over there, but Kyle Busch, really hard to get off of him. That's just not... I really want to, but I'm not going to, honestly. So I'll let someone else do that. He's just too fast, especially with the Spacer Duck combo. I just got to kind of go with that for right now. Not much else to go off of. Then Jimmie Johnson, starting 21st. He has looked so much better this year than the last 2 years, honestly, and especially at the Spacer and Aero Duck tracks, where we've seen him run around the top 10. 10th, 11th is where we see him running on average about. Really good at Talladega historically. He's led a bunch of laps here and stuff. His teammates at Hendrick have all been pretty good at Talladega. This might be the week to use the Jimmie Johnson. Usually Chevy is like plus 500, plus 600 to win. They're like plus 1... I don't know, like plus 200, I think, plus 250, somewhere in that range. So, of course, a lot of it's due to the extra variance and stuff, but I think Johnson's more likely to get a win here than pretty much anywhere else outside of, like, his tracks like Dover, Martinsville. And even there, he hasn't really seemed like he's had it too much. Did look great at Texas, which are running the Ducks and the Spacers there, but, there still are little things like the spoiler and stuff. And I also noticed in practice, I think it was Kurt Busch was trying to give him a little bit of a bump. No, it was Kyle Busch, I think. Someone kept trying to give him a little bit of a run, and then he would get loose each time. So there's a little bit of a concern with Jimmie Johnson there. But, I'll probably get off him a little bit there. But I don't know. I'm still kind of intrigued. He took a really, really long run in final practice. Really both practices, and looked pretty solid in them. So I'll probably just use him a fair amount, maybe the field or so. And if it sounded like people aren't going to even be on Jimmie Johnson for whatever reason, I might try to go over, but usually that's hard to do with how public he is. He's almost like, I guess not so much anymore, but you'd still see him being over-owned, and in spots where he's, lines up even relatively well, you see his ownership just skyrocket because he's Jimmie Johnson. And at $8,300, it doesn't feel like a right price for Jimmie Johnson, even though it pretty much is. He might even be a little too expensive. But moving on, gotta hurry up here. Martin Truex Jr. starting 20th. He generally sucks here. He has some top 10s back 2016, 2015, 2013, but his last 5 finishes here have all been bottom 20. Ran into trouble and stuff. He's one of the drivers that actually looks slower with the Aero Ducks than, or in the, the Spacer, these tracks than at normal tracks. Of course, a little bit is going to be helped by his great Richmond performance, which he's coming right off of. His ownership had creeped pretty low, but I think with the win, it'll kind of get back there. I know that his, his performances here have been pretty bad. I don't know if people are looking too much into that or whatever, but, honestly, he's, on FanDuel, I think he's really expensive, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, he's actually really cheap over there on FanDuel. That's what it was. He'll be very popular over there. I think he'll be a manageable ownership over on DraftKings at 10-1. And, I don't mind really using him at all. Kyle Busch is the one that's going to get really, really out of hand. Hamlin too, but I don't know about Truex. Still just doesn't seem like he's... I don't know. I think I'll probably lean towards fading him just because of, the fact he's coming off a win and he's looked worse with the Aero Ducks in. And he tends to be kind of single lane. He tends to really want to stay in the inside at all times. And, he might not be that aggressive driver you need to switch lanes and even try to put a block on people, which makes him safe. I would play him in cash games for sure, but I don't know about GPP as much. Still in a good spot, all things considered. Just if the ownership's going to be there, I'm not in on GPP. If it is, if somehow he goes overlooked, which I doubt, then I'd be inclined to using him. I just really wish I knew these things ahead of time, but we can only do our best to guess. So Matt Tifft, who had that killer final practice there, I skipped over a really important guy here. Let's talk about Kevin Harvick real quick. Second most expensive on the board at $11,600, starting in 19th. Really good spot, and honestly, he's a really comparable play to Kyle Busch. He's just going to come in at like way less ownership. He's actually been a little bit faster in fast laps at these tracks than Kyle Busch has, but not when it comes to 10-lap, 30-lap averages. It's actually been a little bit slower than in general. He's really kind of has like a 1.5 mile sort of focus on the year, it feels. Still driving a Ford, which is nice. Working together with the different teams there seem to really be somebody that people like to draft with a lot. So he'll have friends out there. You could say the same about like Truex, really. It really seems like the Chevys are ones that are really, really pent up about keeping to themselves. And JGR has sort of always done that. But the Fords, they have the two big teams there that kind of work together. And you've also got potentially the front row guys being pretty fast with them over qualifying and stuff. So, with there just being a lot more Fords than Toyotas, you got to really like the Fords here. They're going to have a lot of help all over the place. And it's, you'd say the same about Chevy, but, Chevy's still just a little bit behind because they're Chevy. Kevin Harvick, I like using him over Kyle Busch, perhaps. I mean, I'm still going to play a bunch of Kyle Busch, but if I can get... I'm going to cram in as much Harvick as I can, which, again, will probably make my lineups cost a little bit more, but don't really care. I just like guys who start in the 19th position because it's like the $9.99 effect, like you see at a store. And, people like to just say, I want to play guys starting in the back 20. I mean, Harvick might as well be starting in the back 20, being as good of a driver as he is starting at 19th, so... I'm kind of all over that play there. I might even play him more than Kyle Busch. And then going to run through the top 18 guys here. They're not going to matter as much, but Tifft, we touched on him earlier. I had that really fast run, and I am intrigued to see him. Someone that has such a cheap price, being able to draft up there with the better drivers. Still super sketchy, starting 18th. Ownership will be low, but... I don't know if it's totally worth it, but I'm not going to have 0 shares of him. He's definitely not an uncheck. Someone I'm going to have just in case he sticks around, but I don't see much upside for him. Paul Menard starting 17th. I think this is a really good spot for Menard. He has 6 top 10 finishes here over the last 9 races, and he's going to stay in the top 15, I think. We've kind of seen that from him in the last few weeks, but he's honestly, he looked really good at like Daytona. In general, he does do a bit better at plate races. I know it doesn't apply over too much, but one thing I really do care about is the fact that he's got a decent enough starting position at 17th, and he will be low owned. I will say that he's just going to be lower owned than a lot of the other guys here in that $6,000 range or so. But he's also driving for the Wood Bros, who's got that direct link with Penske, with him driving Blaney's former car, and he was right there in the Ford Mustang stacks, the drafts, just running right alongside them, working as one of them. So he's pretty much an ultra cheap, like low key Penske driver. And Penske is really good here. They are the best at this track. So. Paul Menard, I'm actually feeling that play a pretty decent amount, even though he's starting in the top 20, especially if it doesn't race quite like usual restrictor plate race does. You've got Daniel Suárez starting in 16th. He's another guy I have circled. He's finished top 20 in his last 4 races here in Talladega, and he's noticeably better with the spacers and ducks in from what we've seen so far this year. Average green flag speed. On average, he's about 6th on the board, 6th or 7th usually. Has had some really good runs. Do like seeing Daniel Suárez there. At 16th, I think his ownership will be low, maybe even single digits, just because of where he's starting at. But I think he can stay there and even move up and even finish top 5. I think he has that sort of upside in his Stewart-Haas Racing Ford. His teammates are way more expensive than him, but he's going to be a lot more of their equal this week. Love Daniel Suárez at 16th. And you've got David Ragan starting in 15th. One of the 2 front row motorsport, or really all 3 front row motorsport Fords, overqualified. And Ragan here, I don't know. Even though he qualified 15th, which would usually make me cross him off the board entirely, he has the 5 top 10 finishes here over the last 12 races. Other than that, it's like all DNFs too. He only has one finish between 30th and 10th, and that was the 24th in the 2016 fall race. Like, it's hit or miss for this guy. And 3 of the last 4 races here of the last 2 years, he's finished top 10 consistently. Just had that wreck in really, really early on. He was one of the first ones to go down. Him and his teammate McDowell went down first thing in last year's Talladega race. So I don't know if that's a bit of a concern at all. They look great now. They actually looked, if I remember correctly, they were looking really bad that week and ended up just crapping out. But this week they are looking incredible. Ragan was second in speed in the first practice. Of course, quite biased. I mean, he was 36th in the second practice, just to show you how ridiculous practice is. But he was capable of getting his car, up to that crazy amount of speed up there with Kurt Busch and running around in that draft. Even if for a little bit he found some speed, at least he was able to hang pretty well. So really good FanDuel play, I'd say, David Ragan. On DraftKings, I would limit him pretty severely, but I wouldn't fade him entirely. Kurt Busch, starting in 14th. He's just been super solid with the finishes this year. Just consecutive top 10 streak. I think that was finally broken. But he also likes to come top 10 here a lot. He's finished top 10 in 6 of the last 8 races here. Runner-up in this race last year in the spring. Got like some Kurt Busch. He's starting in 14th. He'll move up a little bit. It's hard to expect him to, if he ran it 100 times, he probably wouldn't even move up too many spots most of the times, but he definitely has the top 5 upside. Top 10 upside is certainly there. This is a spot where I'll probably, we're getting close to the top 10-ish where we kind of don't want to use them. But Kurt Busch, I think he still has a little bit of upside to move up. And we finally saw his ownership starting to lower a little bit after they really jacked up his price. And he's still right at 9,000. So don't mind getting some of him in if his ownership is going to be knocked down a little bit with where he's starting. But him being first in first practice will bump it up a little bit. You've got Ty Dillon starting in 13th in the 13 car. I would love Ty Dillon, who has finished top 15 in all 4 races here in Talladega in his young career, but only to the tune of a 70 driver rating. So it really goes to show how awesome survival is here. Yeah, he's a beast at surviving, and he did run with a lot of the Chevys up there, but starting 13th is a little steep for the guy. FanDuel is where you play him. Maybe, I don't see him doing anything on DraftKings, actually, never mind. Just play him on FanDuel if you play both sites. Michael McDowell, starting 12th. I would say it's a little high, but the dude just finished 5th at Daytona from, starting back 5. He's crashed here 4 years in a row, or 4 races in a row, and pretty much almost never has a top 15 finish here. Does not have the success that he has at Daytona, and with this being a new package and all, I can't really condone this play. At the spacer and duct tracks, him and Ty Dillon both run about 26th position, which ain't going to really do it for you. I like these guys. I would love them if they started 30th or below. I mean, Michael McDowell made us a ton of money week 1. We just went absolutely in on him, and he just crushed. But sorry, compadre, not this week. It's not going to work out. Chase Elliott starting 11th. Looked pretty fast in first practice, running as part of that big group. Just a nice little Chevy piece. 3rd in this race here last year. Debuted here 5th in 2016. And again, the Daytona, when he doesn't crash at Daytona, he does really well. Had the fastest average lap speed at Daytona for what it's worth. It's the only big super speedway we've seen so far this year, but it was with the restrictor plate. But yeah, Hendrick, Hendrick car, have all the Chevys around him. Just great for all things Chevy stacks. The ownership is going to be really low for Chase, really low. People are going to concentrate the ownership on those guys starting towards the back. So, if you want to make a heavy play on him, you can. I don't really see him. He would have to at this point he would have to go up there and dominate and do a little bit of work to really put up too huge of a score, but maybe even a top 3 would be decent enough. Then in 10th position, you've got a guy I'm very interested in who nobody else is going to be interested in whatsoever. He's been awful this year. Kyle Larson has ruined so many people's lineups. I'm sure half the NASCAR DFS community has just collectively written this guy off. His ownership is going to be so freaking low starting 10th. And I honestly think that I still believe in Larson a little bit. Maybe it's maybe I'm just insane and keep going back to this well that might not be full, but Larson does have some innate driving skill. I think he can do perfectly well enough at a place like this. He's finished, if you take out the wreck from this race last year when he wrecked pretty much first thing and finished dead last, his last 4 finishes, if you take that out, is 11th, 13th, 12th, and 6th. But he needs to do a little bit more than that, I will say. He'll need to find the lead and maybe finish top 3, top 2. It's a risky play. I'm just saying he's going to be so low owned that if somehow he can find his way out front, and we saw the Chip Ganassi guys working very closely with Hendrick there. This is just, again, it's just a kind of wild and out there play. I really think his ownership is going to be so low, and at 10th that might be salvageable for something. Now we're going into pretty much what is the dead zone. Usually this part of the podcast is where I run through the guys in the bottom 5 that are useless, but this time it's the guys in the top 10 that are useless, at least the top 9. Larson's probably going to be useless. I will throw that out there, but there's a chance he's not. And he could be one heck of a leverage play. You could say it about these guys, I guess. Some of these guys are known entities, but it's getting to the point where if you start 9th or higher, you're not only going to need to win, you're going to need to dominate some laps and stuff. So, I think Larson has a little bit of an upside to do that. Alex Bowman, however, starting 9th, even though he's in Dale Earnhardt Jr.'s former car, and he actually has, found the lead here, had a pretty good run in the spring race last year here, finishing 8th. Other than that, it's been crashes for him here, so not too much to go off of. You could go back to 2015, 2016 when he was with a completely different team and finishing last and stuff. But he's starting 9th, gonna have no ownership for a good reason. I'm not going to be a part of that either. Probably, he's definitely the guy you're leaving out of your Chevy stacks and stuff. I don't see Bowman not only finding the lead, but he would have to keep it for a long time or something. And I just don't really see that from him. Probably going to be one of my few fades on the board. Next few guys, of course, are Penske guys, so they're really going to matter here. You've got Logano starting in 8th, who honestly has been one of the more improved guys with this tapered spacer package so far on the year. So, Mr. Logano, honestly, he can get it, and he can absolutely get it at this track. He's actually tied with Kyle Busch and his teammate Keselowski for odds-on favorite. And his finishes here, if you get rid of the DNFs and crashes, his last 6 finishes have been 5th, 1st, 4th, 1st. I said 6, so 11th. I'll throw that one on there. It's not all top 5s, but man, is it mostly top 5s. So consistently good here. Spent a good amount of time, with my dad rooting for him, was watching them really closely, and they were just, up there. Logano was, pretty much the one that was basically like a Stewart-Haas car, with how they were. I know after a while, Stewart-Haas ended up just being purely by themselves for a big stretch, but Logano, I feel like I recall he got into some sort of trouble in the middle of the race that kind of sent him back, and he was never really the same. But I think his ownership's going to be low. It's always low. People are always sleeping on Logano constantly. As always, his main concern is fast laps on DraftKings, but that's not really going to be a thing much this week. He would need to dominate. I will definitely say that, but The dude averages 23 lead laps at this track, more than anybody in the field. I think he can work his way up a bit. I know he's got his 2 teammates ahead of him, but he's definitely someone that can not only grab the lead, but he possibly has the potential to even keep it and dominate a little bit. We have seen that from him in 2016, the fall race. He started in 16th, won the race, and had 45 lead laps. We've also seen him lead 70 laps here. In this race last year, the spring race, he led 70 laps, won the race, and scored 72.5 DraftKings points, which is not shabby at all. So, we've also seen him lead 59 laps in the fall 2017 race. So he's not a stranger to, finding the lead here. Probably one of the actual, dominators of this race, potentially. And the others are really his teammates. So let me hurry up and finish this. Talking about Ryan Blaney here starting in 7th. Outside of Kyle Busch, Ryan Blaney he's really been the second fastest of anyone. And in every single spacer plus aero duct track, he's had the fastest 30-lap average. Is just a king at the long run speed right now. Leading a lot of laps this year, really looking like one of the other Penske drivers and being at pretty much near their level. Still a bit cheaper on the sites, but he's getting there. He hasn't really shown too much at this track since a 4th place finish back in 2015, his second time around. But if we're looking at, if you're focusing at all on the spacer and duck sort of splits, he's someone that sticks out big time in that. I don't know. I really don't think long run speeds will honestly be that helpful here. That's just not really how it works. The longer a run, you're just going to stay single file for the most part. But, still, he's just been really fast and could, if he just works his way up there early, I can see, a situation where, Logano, Blaney, and Keselowski are just by themselves drafting out front, and he's just in the back collecting, some fast laps or something. That could happen here, really, with any of these guys. So Logano and Blaney, sort of the same play. I would say I like Logano more because he has the domination upside that you kind of need here, but Ryan Blaney has just been really fast with the package. I still probably prefer Logano, honestly, despite the price. Then in 6th, you've got a guy who's won multiple restrictor plate races over the last couple of years, and over his last 4 races here, over his last 5 races here, has 4 top 5 finishes and a win, and that's Ricky Stenhouse Jr. As part of that really fast group in final practice, and starting 6th, qualified super high. You could almost expect that with him coming here. Really kind of makes you, look at Ryan Newman over there with his his lone Roush teammate. He already has a good history here, so you expect that he, in Trevor Bayne's car, which, by the way, Bayne is always really good at racing restrictor plates. Well, it's hard not to be super bullish on Roush, and honestly, never mind. Never mind. I said I would have you guys hold it to me that I would fade Newman. It's just hard to, but yeah, I definitely see why, their ideal play is the Roush guys. Stenhouse just starting way too far up. When he won at Daytona, he literally led several laps. He led I think almost 20 laps, and he won, and he wasn't in the optimal because he started on the pole. He wasn't even close to being in the optimal. That's just how this race is usually. Now, if it's, again, if you're making it situationally where, this races out more like a normal race, then Stenhouse would be someone I'd kind of think to target. Maybe on FanDuel more than anything, but I don't know. He's actually really priced up on FanDuel. His price is insanely expensive, $10,500 over there, compared to $7,400 on DraftKings. But shoot, I would almost pay it over there and just hope that nobody plays him. So for the most part, you can pretty much safely avoid these guys in the top 5 or so. Stenhouse, he just has the insanely consistent history here and all, but again, the history is changing with the changes on the horizon here. It's hard to really expect Stenhouse to do too much, unless you're really hoping for a crash, which he can do. Then Daniel Hemrick starting 5th. My biggest fade on the board. No way. No way he stays top 5, let alone has any sort of good finish or any sort of lead laps or something. I know he's Austin Dillon's teammate who is sitting on the pole right now. He could honestly just run around the top 10 and it wouldn't be terribly surprising, but for the most part, I expect him to drop pretty much immediately. And that's something that will happen here, which, the constant lead changes and stuff. It makes it really, really unappetizing to be these guys in the very top. So Hemrick, just a huge fade. Keselowski starting 4th, probably one of the more obvious early lap leader kind of guys, and he has also had very long bouts of lead laps here. Has 3 wins since 2014. Outside of those wins, really, it's been either wins or sort of bad luck for him. Both of his races here last year had some pretty bad luck, but the thing is, his best skill is knowing how to block off the lead, and if that's going to be really kind of denied with the fast runs and almost the inability to block and the potential to see tons of lead lap changes, it's just not looking good for Keselowski at all. I think his history and his wins here will get him just enough ownership to where you can't even make him that kind of leverage play. So you just got to kind of fade it, really fade this whole top 5 and just move on and hope that, the field plays them. Bowyer starting in 3rd, starting way too high. I know he finished runner-up in the fall race last year, but it was literally just because he was on Team Stewart-Haas. You could maybe throw him or Almirola into a Stewart-Haas racing lineup just in case they do what they did last year all over again, but I am really not sold on that strategy this year. Stewart-Haas has taken a big step back. They were the best last year. This year, the best, I don't know, it's probably Penske slightly edging out JGR, but really it's Kyle Busch and then Penske and then the rest of JGR, for being quite honest, and then the Stewart-Haas guys as well. But Bowyer, even Almirola, your defending champion, starting 2nd. These guys are complete fades. Finishing 1 and 2 in this race last year just makes even more of a fade. I know Almirola, he has 5 straight top 10 finishes here. It looks amazing. But starting 2nd, if he doesn't get lead in fast laps, which he has not historically here, he's not just led laps. He got the lead at the very end after Harvick led a crap ton. If he doesn't get those lead laps, he's completely worthless. And we're not seeing guys, starting 2nd that score a ton here. And with all the expected lead changes and shuffling and variance and all this, it makes it super hard to fit Almirola. And then finally, to end the podcast Austin Dillon on the pole. Just fade him. Just fade that guy. There's no way. If maybe a lead every lap and people will point out this clip in the future or something, but just no. Don't play the pole sitter here. That is ridiculous. You can look and see. Pole sitters here average 20 fantasy points. That's where guys that start 30th average 38. It's not even close. Even if it's not like last year, still just not enough laps to go around to really bank on domination like that. And with the lead changes again, all that, just no Austin Dillon. And that will conclude the podcast. Remember, dfsarmy.com to check out all the content I've gone over. You can get the research station up, available for the Truck and Xfinity series, one of the only sites doing that every week. Even with the small time in between, is very, very close yesterday, but again, that's what provided a lot of our edge. And just helped us crush, and we've been crushing Xfinity since it came out. Trucks, whenever we get that, we crush that. So hop on board. You get all the, baseball season's about to start. You get all of that included with your package. DFSarmy.com, promo code TACO. And I will see you guys next week at What is it, Dover? I think it's Dover. I'll see you guys then.